Good evening, one and all, citizens of Veridora, citizens of the interwebs. Thank you for attending this. Down the rabbit hole with Ed the Techie and myself as we go into the case of Dr. David Kelly. Ed, how are you this fine evening?
Good evening, John. Good evening, everyone listening. I'm doing absolutely fine. Thank you very much. Looking forward to another interesting rabbit hole with you guys. And big shout out to my Twitter friends and real life friends that are probably listening.
Excellent, excellent. 12 viewers at the moment. That's quite good. So early in the stream, but only 8 likes.
Good. We'll probably get some more on.
Come on, people. You know what to do. Right. Excellent. Right.
We can always chit chat for a bit.
No,
Give
no.
people time
Well,
to
it's
come
up
on.
to you. But we'll just ask the troll room. How's the audio? How does it sound? Are we loud and clear? Ed, do you want to give them some vocals?
Vocals? What sort of vocals?
Well, just
Testing,
speak to them.
1,
Speak
2,
to them,
3.
man.
Yeah, but you always say that and put me on the spot, and my mind just goes completely blank.
Well, there you go. That's enough. 5 by 5. There we go. Right. Okay. Excellent. So, Ed, over to you.
Without further ado, shall we?
Let's go for it, mate. Let's go for it.
So, David Kelly, which has been in the news because it's 3 days ago. Well, 20 years and 3 days since his body was found. And it's still shrouded in mystery and intrigue. I mean, I don't really watch the kind of mainstream dinosaur media at all, so I don't know if there was any coverage on it. I certainly didn't really see anything on any of the official people, of the official social media feeds and people like the BBC and stuff. For those who don't know, he was a renowned government weapons inspector whose body was discovered in the woods near his home shortly after being revealed as the source for a controversial BBC report about the Iraq weapons of mass destruction dossier being sexed up by Alistair Campbell, apparently. The official verdict, but that's just my opinion. The official verdict was suicide, but many have doubted his conclusions over the years, me included, and foul play has been suspected. I don't know anyone even the most asleep of normies back then were thinking, hang on a minute. But his mysterious demise has fueled speculation about cover-ups relating to flawed intelligence used to justify the invasion of Iraq. The unclear circumstances surrounding his high-profile death provide fertile ground for conspiracy theorists and rabbit hole explorers, because there's plenty of dark actors and hidden agendas, and just that sort of it's one of those classic deaths that we've discovered, that we've investigated before on our rabbit holes, like JFK and the previous one about John Paul I.
Yeah.
So David Kelly, let's put a picture of him up. There we go. Married to Janice Kelly, and lived in Oxfordshire. I'm not going to do too much of the background, but we should, particularly for people not that familiar with the case, we'll just do a little bit of background. He studied bacteriology and virology at uni. After that, he joined the Ministry of Defence in 1984 and worked as a government at the government secret Porton Down facility.
Yeah.
He was also, ended up...
That's quite a distance away from Oxfordshire, isn't it?
I don't actually know.
I thought Porton Down was over near Reading. I may be completely wrong.
I'm not sure. I'd have to check. I'll have to do
you carry on. I'll just have a wee dig around and find out.
Yeah. And it's something that most people, because particularly back in 2003 when this was a story, and the times that the mainstream media have mentioned it since, their main focus with him is as a weapons inspector. And he was. I mean, he was very, very high up.
Yeah.
He was pretty much the most important person in terms of weapons inspections. He worked at the UN. He was trusted by the Soviets. He dealt with secret nuclear weapons inspections and biological weapons inspections. Sorry, not nuclear, but biological weapons inspections when there was a secret deal done between the Soviets and the Americans back in, I think it was the 80s, but I'm not sure exactly when. And it wasn't broadcast at all, but they essentially agreed to inspect each other's facilities, and David Kelly was one of the people involved in that.
Yeah.
So yeah, he was. He ended up with Porton Down. He ended up as chief microbiologist. So he wasn't a kind of lowly functionary. This is a guy who had access to lots and lots and lots of secrets.
Yeah. So Porton Down is in Wiltshire.
Right.
Near Salisbury. Okay.
So that is quite a way.
That is quite a way.
If I worked to Porton Down, I would want to live quite far away from
well, that's true. Do you know it was founded in 1916? It is the world's oldest chemical and biological weapons research centre.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
And it's been involved in there's all sorts of dodgy stuff surrounding Porton Down. Mm-hmm. But we'll come to that. I mean, it is ostensibly a high security site researching chemical and biological weapons to help defend against attacks of such weapons. However, journalists and activists accuse Porton Down of ethical violations in human testing and maintaining prohibitive offensive capabilities. As a senior scientist, Kelly had high-level security clearance and worked on sensitive biodefense programs. Beyond his covert duties, Kelly also advised the UK government and UN weapons inspections teams investigating the Iraqi WMD capabilities throughout the 1990s. He participated in over 40 inspection missions and earned immense respect in the field. After being appointed senior advisor on biological weapons at the MOD in 2001, Kelly found himself at the center of the storm over Iraq intelligence assessments. With such extensive classified knowledge and connections, he was a rare insider uniquely positioned to judge the accuracy of the government's public WMD claims. And we have to cover the WMD controversy because it's the official explanation for why. Mm-hmm. It's the official unofficial explanation because the official explanation is suicide. And the official unofficial explanation is that it was something to do with the Iraqi weapons inspections and the war and all of that stuff. But then there's unofficial sort of explanations, which we'll come to in a bit. But in the context of the Iraq WMD controversy, the allegations that politicians and intelligence chiefs had sexed up this dossier. Let me just find the slide for it. There we go. And it led to crazy claims about 45 minutes from attack, and we got the two. I just such a creepy picture of those two cockwombles. And obviously, Prime Minister Tony Blair had allied the UK early on as a key partner of George Bush's hawkish post 9/11 agenda. And this is despite mass public opposition. I mean, the anti-war march before the Iraq war in 2003, they estimated something like 2 million people on the streets of London. There's nobody. The only people, well, it's pretty much Tony Blair is the only person in the country that wanted there to be any kind of war. I suppose maybe a few other hawks, but he was the one that
Alistair Campbell
had pretty much got into bed with Bush.
Yeah.
And despite massive public opposition, Blair aggressively made the case for military action to eliminate Saddam Hussein's supposed WMD arsenal. The now infamous September 2002 intelligence dossier warned that Iraq could launch chemical or biological attacks within 45 minutes. And that was a claim later proven completely bogus.
Yeah.
Not just a little bit false, but I mean, that was Colin Powell waving supposed weapons of mass destructions around in the UN.
Yeah, imagine if it really was, say something like Novichok and he dropped it. Oh, shit.
He was probably messing with them before he went up, and he was like, "Oh, check this out, guys! Oh, he dropped it. No, it's all right.
It's okay. It's only sawdust." Yeah.
So critics accused Blair of selectively highlighting the shaky intelligence to match preordained policy goals.
Yeah.
With its credibility on the line, the government aggressively sought to confirm the existence of prohibited Iraqi WMD programs. We now know that the programs never existed, but at the time,
it just sounds
Blair relied on the aggressive assessments.
It just sounds so similar to what's going on right now, doesn't it?
I've always thought that Blair is a progenitor of a lot of the bad stuff that happened. He put a lot of health service changes in place, etc.
Yeah.
But as we'll come to in the course of the podcast, I personally have come. I mean, because I was really involved in this case right from the beginning, because I was blogging actively at the time, and I didn't believe it for a second. And with the gift of hindsight, particularly what's happened over the last 3 years, and deaths of other microbiologists that happened around the time of David Kelly, because David Kelly was quite well publicized, but there's a whole bunch of other microbiologists that mysteriously met their end.
There was a car crash, wasn't there? One of them.
Yeah, there was car crashes, there was heart attacks, there was into all sorts.
Later on, the other ones that died, no?
Yeah, I mean, the WMD, it was what launched an illegal war. What we now know to be an illegal war, because all the arguments that they used to justify the war turned out to be nonsense.
Yes, but apparently it wasn't an illegal war because no one was ever charged with it. That's what
that's how international relations work.
That's
lawyers for you.
That's what John Kerry told the world. It's okay. It's not an illegal war, and George Bush didn't do anything wrong, and Tony Blair didn't do anything wrong because it's not an illegal war. It's not a war crime because no one was ever charged with it. So that seems to be the criteria.
John Kerry just exemplifies everything that's wrong with the American political class.
Yeah. And then
but
some.
I mean, the thing is that this dodgy dossier was a keystone of the whole British government propaganda. And those questioning its validity, like Dr. Kelly, posed massive threat. Now, as far as David Kelly's involvement in the controversy, in May 2003, journalist Andrew Gilligan reported on the BBC radio that an anonymous source informed him that the dossier had been deliberately sexed up by inserting unconfirmed claims, contrary to intelligence community advice. The resulting uproar led to demands for an inquiry and hunt for the source. On July the 9th, Dr. Kelly wrote to his superiors admitting he likely met with Gilligan. Just 3 days later, Kelly left his home in the village of Southmore, telling his wife he was going for a walk, and he was never seen alive.
And he took the dog, didn't he? Did he take the dog?
I'm not sure. Did he take it?
Right, okay.
I remember.
Maybe I'm wrong. It's okay.
I don't think he did.
Right, okay.
So he left his home in the village of Southmore, telling his wife he was going, nothing about a dog.
Right, okay.
Let's just pull up the Southmore Woodlands. And he was never seen alive again. He was forcibly thrust into the pub. Sorry, go on.
Sorry, this wasn't unusual for him to go for a walk, though, on this.
No, not at all. No, I mean, he was an avid walker. He lived out in the countryside. And
yep.
So he was, as I was saying, he was forcibly thrust in the public eye, accused of dishonesty and endangering national security. But he had previously voiced concerns about misleading use of intelligence before. Colleagues described him as profoundly upset over the government's public WMD claims in the months leading up to his death. Some believe Kelly was even planning to write a revealing book detailing how assessments were manipulated and politicized. Immediately following his apparent suicide, Kelly's home computers were seized by authorities, provoking ongoing suspicions of a cover-up. And it supposedly one of the computers that was taken contained the manuscript for this book, and he'd supposedly approached a number of authors, and they said, "Look, you've signed the Official Secrets Act. What the hell? You can't do this." And he said something along the lines of, "Well, I want someone else to write it, and I'm going to feed them information," which is a bit daft and a bit naive, but. That's also second-hand information. So whether
academics are like that, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean there's so much good material on the internet now relating to David Kelly's death. So if people want to research this further after the podcast, I'd highly recommend you go over to James Corbett's corbettreport.com and do a search in his search bar for David Kelly, because he's done a recent update to the case, which was very fascinating. There's also a load of other research material there. So now, okay, could you cue up the first video?
Yes, it's
and
ready.
Just
Do I play it?
Yeah, this is just to give people a flavour of.
Okay, here we go.
Given his job, his contacts, the politics of the time, his sudden death and 7 years of secrecy, it's no wonder there's so much conspiracy surrounding Dr. David Kelly. Today, this is supposed to put all that to an end. The documents we were not supposed to see for 70 years. The orientation and arrangement of the wounds over the left wrist are typical of self-inflicted injury. It details the cause of death and rules out what didn't kill him. There is a total lack of classical defence wounds against a sharp weapon attack, it says. The post-mortem describes a series of wounds on his left wrist and hand, some so light on the skin that they suggest hesitation. But the biggest and deepest was 6 centimetres long and between 1 and 1.5 centimetres deep. It completely severed the ulnar artery, causing heavy bleeding. The toxicology report shows that Dr. Kelly had taken coproximol. He swallowed a significant number of tablets, but not enough to kill him. It says he had a silent coronary artery disease, which, coupled with the pills and the wounds, played a part in his death. Samples of one of his lungs also proved, the post-mortem says, that no chemicals were involved in overpowering him prior to his death. Of course, none of this should really be a surprise. It matches, almost fact by fact, the revelations of the Hutton inquiry into his death in 2004. Lord Hutton ruled that the post-mortem should be secret for 70 years to spare the Kelly. The family have stayed silent. Friends remain muddled.
I think his decision to tag the documents as secret turned out to be a big mistake. He has a big heart, Lord Hutton, but I don't think his judgments. And of course it gave the conspiracy theorists an enormous amount of material.
They have not been silenced. Among them, 2 groups of doctors who published their newspapers earlier this year. Same view. The inquest must be ordered.
Of suicide has been adequately proven because safe diagnosis. Doubt.
You ever felt like a fall guy? I mean, you've been set up, haven't you?
Days before his death, Dr. Kelly found himself justification for the arrest as the source of a BBC. The government had sexed up Saddam's weapons of mass destruction.
Have you got blood on your hands? Over this.
Followed his death, but in England, the last government refused to order one.
They were just, it was an
Here
experiment.
we go, we're back. That was strange because the audio started clipping there. I don't understand why. I don't know if it's just maybe a dodgy clip or something, but
Yeah, I mean, I watched it through and it seemed all right.
yeah, that's
so
weird.
maybe I missed a bit. Anyway, we don't really need the videos.
We've got more, and we'll give it another shot with the next one.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just kind of setting the scene. And there's one thing I'd like to mention there. Dr. Kelly's a smart guy, yeah?
Yep.
You think if he was going to commit suicide, he would know how to do it?
Yeah, you'd think so. But not
Yeah.
just that. What's also interesting is that his friends, lots of his friends and close people who knew him, reported that he had a bit of a gammy right hand.
Yeah.
So he would have actually physically
Struggled.
really struggled to try and sever the ulnar artery. But it's also,
if you're going to do it, if you're getting to the point where you're going to do it, you don't cut that direction. You cut lengthways in.
yeah, and you don't go for the ulnar artery,
No,
which
you
is
go for the vein.
a tiny, deep little. I mean, it's absurd. But then, whoever, assuming that he didn't do it himself, one wonders why the person doing it didn't choose to make it a little bit more believable. I mean,
Well,
there's all sorts of.
maybe they didn't do the
That's Harrow
research.
Downhill. That was where he was found.
Yeah.
And then there's some footage there of the police tent. But there's loads and loads of inconsistencies and things that don't make sense about how his body was discovered, because it was first discovered by a couple of the search team, and then it was essentially left in the care of a policeman
Uh-huh.
for about 30 minutes.
Right.
And there's all sorts of stories about a helicopter. There's stories about the body having been moved, where the people who originally found it said that he was kind of propped up on a tree. And then the people who turned up half an hour later said he was lying flat. And Lord Hutton never questioned the police officer that found that was left with Kelly's body.
Yeah.
I think he was CID. Didn't actually stupidly make a note of his name. But yeah, you get caught up with these things. And also there was a remarkable lack of blood. That was something that the paramedics commented on. And there's quite an extensive, I've still got a copy of it on my blog. But there's quite an extensive interview with the paramedics who found him. And they also report all sorts of issues. Now, the death certificate listed the official cause as hemorrhage from the wrist wound, which is unlikely with an ulnar artery because thin little arteries tend to close up, and you only have to ask any ER doctor. The wrist wound is known amongst the ER community and stuff as a classic cry for help, because it's very, very difficult to kill yourself by slitting your wrists.
Yeah. Unless you do it the right way.
Hollywood.
Yeah.
And I mean, it can be done, but you have to find some way of stopping the arteries closing up.
A warm bath.
Yeah. And you have to do a lot of damage to yourself as well.
Yeah.
Now, multiple medical professionals have since argued the described injuries were highly inconsistent with bleeding to death. Given his expertise, Kelly would have known severing the ulnar artery was an extremely uncertain method.
Yeah.
The number of pills missing from the packets of painkillers at the scene also represented only a partial dose. 10 doctors released a joint statement contending that the minimal amount of blood pooled by Kelly's body indicated he had died elsewhere. They were barred from giving evidence at the official inquest, fueling accusations of a cover-up. And more accusations of the cover-up came from that helicopter, because although it's widely known about, the flight logs for the helicopter were redacted in large part.
Whose helicopter?
Now, whether that's to actually cover something up, or whether it's just to make it look like they're covering up something, like the pathology report, that essentially they say, oh no, we're going to keep this secret, and then they release, and all the conspiracy theorists go crazy, and then they release it and make everyone look like idiots, basically.
Yeah. So whose helicopter?
And I wonder
was it?
sometimes that about the helicopter, was that a serious thing?
Whose
whose
helicopter was it?
And the other thing is that
Hello? Oh, am I muted? No.
well, none of this is known. This is the thing. And one of the other interesting things about the very start of the whole thing is that the police operation investigating his death was called Operation Mason. And the file, or the folder and the file that contained this operation, were created 9 hours before the body was found.
That's a bit strange. Right. The helicopter,
Well,
who did it belong to?
Well, that's a good question. That's a good question. Like I said, the flight logs were redacted. It's not
So they've never exposed who it belonged to.
not as far as I know. I mean, there are probably people listening who know more about the case than I do. Who, if so, jump into chat if you know.
Was it alleged to have landed? No.
Yeah, no, it landed and then stuck around for a while and then took off again.
Right. And this guy died in what, 2003? Yeah, okay. Okay, right.
Now, renowned forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Powers later described the scenario as highly unlikely and possibly technically impossible. Powers emphasized that poisoning or another method of assassination better fit the described facts. The minimal supporting evidence of a determined suicide attempt led him to conclude that Kelly had been killed by a clandestine third party. Now, let's see if we can run that second video. And if this doesn't work, we'll give up with the video.
Yeah, okay. Right, here we go.
By his appearance before the Foreign Affairs Select Committee in July 2003, the suspicion was Weapons Inspector Dr. David Kelly was the source revealing government intelligence on Iraq had been sexed up.
I reckon you're chaff. You've been thrown up to divert our probing. You ever felt like a fall guy? I mean, you've been set up, haven't you?
A man under pressure, he'd once said, "I will probably be found dead in the woods." Within days of this appearance at the committee, that's exactly what happened. Coincidentally or otherwise, Dr. Kelly had predicted his own death. Found in woodland close to his home, he'd apparently committed suicide, but for some, things didn't quite add up. For example, how did he cut his left wrist when friends say he had a damaged right arm? How did he take 29 tablets when he had an aversion to swallowing pills? And why were there no fingerprints on the knife that he used?
The principal cause of death was bleeding from incised wounds to the left wrist, which Dr. Kelly inflicted himself with the knife found beside his body.
Lord Hutton's Iraq inquiry was satisfied Dr. Kelly had bled to death. Medical experts disagree, especially as an inquest into his death was started but never finished.
The usual process through the coronial system, which works, generally speaking, extremely well, very experienced people involved in it, but the proper and in-depth investigation into the circumstances of this death were not performed, and that's why we believe there should now be a proper inquiry into those circumstances.
Which experts believe could prove finally that it was inconceivable the 59-year-old could have bled to death.
I've never spoken since the death was announced and the cause of death was announced to a single doctor who has found the cause of death as presented to be credible. And I have never come across, and I don't know anyone who has come across, death of one ulnar artery.
Strong views play well into the hands of the conspiracy theorists. Many of whose forces may have been at hand in Dr. Kelly's demise, even at the height. But one friend of Dr. Kelly says talk of conspiracy is nonsense.
It emerged that he...
Yeah, okay. Right, that's weird. It seems to run fine for a minute or so, and then the audio starts to drop in and out.
Yeah.
That's bizarre.
Bizarre.
It wouldn't be Chasing Descent if we didn't have a technical issue.
Well, no, it is a rabbit hole, so I like to think that maybe someone's messing with us. Nah, not really. We're not that important, but it's just technical stuff. That's the internet for you. But let's carry on. I mean, as people know, it was massive news at the time, and there was a lot of blame being thrown around, and officially the newspapers were taking the line that he killed himself because of all of the pressure relating to Iraq and having to sit in front of the House of Commons and stuff like that. Which, when you start to understand the sort of person that David Kelly was and the sort of job that he did, I mean, this is a guy who found.
Whoa! Oh,
everything all right?
Yeah, we just had a big buffer, and you. It's back up. Your picture left us, but it's back. It's back. So carry on. Sorry.
Okay. No, that's cool. So yeah, I mean, it was a massive thing. But it was all centered around the dodgy dossier and the BBC, and there was a lot of criticism of the BBC. And it's kind of the time when the government started controlling the BBC more in terms of do what we say or we're going to privatize you and there'll be no more license fee.
Yeah.
Now, the government set up the Hutton inquiry, which most people probably know about. And I mean, it was, people immediately questioned Hutton's suitability given his lack of medical credentials, plus his close connection to the establishment was an issue as well. Suspicions increased when the inquiry only scrutinised the narrow circumstances around Kelly's last days, avoiding broader issues like the dubious WMD intelligence and other things. Hutton ultimately cleared the government of any wrongdoing, concluding Kelly had taken his own life due to depression over being publicly revealed as Gilligan's source. Now, many argued that Hutton's verdict simply did not align with the weight of circumstantial evidence. The inquiry closed off leads rather than digging deeper into inconsistencies. For example, the police officer that was left with Kelly's body for half an hour was never interviewed. He was never brought before Hutton and said, we've got one person saying the body was in one position and another person saying the body was in another position. Can you just let us know what happened? But that didn't happen. And those advocating for a fuller investigation accused Hutton of spearheading an elaborate whitewash on behalf of the intelligence elites. Doubts intensified when Lord Falconer, a close Blair ally, ordered documents related to the inquiry to be classified for an extraordinary 70 years under the Official Secrets Act, shielding them from public scrutiny until 2073. Now, that has some of the documents were, but there were some that were released. I think the pathology report was one of them. Mm-hmm. And that essentially just confirmed the official story. And so James Corbett makes the argument that perhaps some of this secrecy was done deliberately to send people like us chasing down dead-end rabbit holes, which is never fun if you're exploring a rabbit hole and you get to a dead end because you have to go all the way back and you can't turn around and you have to go backwards. It's a pain in the ass.
Especially if there's a ferret chasing you.
Mate, those I don't even know how. Just no. The establishment had obviously closed ranks to pronounce Kelly's death a suicide and concealed proof that might undermine this verdict. And there was a lot of stuff that was concealed, so much so, and it was done. It was so obvious that they had to kind of make a bit of a cack-handed attempt at explaining it away or classifying it or redacting it or whatever. Now, the obvious weaknesses in the official narrative gave rise to a range of theories, alleging political conspiracies or extrajudicial assassinations. Some believe Kelly himself had threatened to leak revealing details about the WMD deceptions in the dossier, either publicly or through contacts with journalists. With so many high-level figures implicated, intelligence services may have feared that he would expose the fabrication of the primary war justification, fatally undermining those responsible. Yeah, don't like him.
No, nobody likes Tony.
No. Others pointed to Kelly's work on biological weapons as making him a target. While at Porton Down, he could have acquired compromising knowledge or spotted violations breaching international conventions. Similarly, his expertise from the Iraqi WMD inspections may have revealed illegal US programs that powerful weapons manufacturers had vested interest in keeping secret. Iraq war advocates with lucrative corporate ties stood to lose billions if the invasion plans fell apart. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to get rid of that creepy, and
the creepy mask.
With the benefit of hindsight, it's all there's so much we now know that war was illegal, and these two, him and Blair particularly, they're war criminals.
They are. They are definitely.
I mean, by any technical explanation of any of it, they're war criminals.
Yeah. By any sensible examination of the criteria would have them strung up as war criminals, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the common thread underlying the various scenarios is that Kelly's integrity led him to clash with dishonest elements in the establishment. As an honorable civil servant, he threatened to reveal facts contradicting the narrative constructed to sell the Iraq war to the public. Those with careers or financial interests at stake, they may have seen permanently silencing Kelly as the only way to prevent damaging disclosures. It is telling that despite the swirl of allegations, the possibility of foul play or murder was never seriously examined by Hutton or the wider government. Mind you of anything? Like every government inquiry since, it's always, they should be called government whitewashes. It would be a much more accurate
if the government's involved,
description of it.
There's always something dodgy going on.
Yeah. Now, one of the didn't mean to do that. We'll go back to this one in a minute. One of the things that I think is worth talking about a little bit more is, was he going to write a book? Yeah. And I mentioned that before. Now, in the months leading up to his death in July 2003, rumors circulated that David Kelly was planning to write an unauthorized account revealing behind-the-scenes details about the British government's dossier on the Iraqi WMD. Mm-hmm. Kelly had been a weapons inspector in Iraq and was the source for a BBC report accusing the government of manipulating the intelligence, although he actually denied that. According to some accounts, Kelly was so angry about being publicly named as the source and having his reputation tarnished that he wanted to set the record straight with his own insider version of events. Some of Kelly's friends and colleagues said he spoke about resigning from his government positions and writing a book exposing the exaggerations and false claims made in the dossier used to support the case for the war. Now, I just find it unlikely somehow, because I mean, this is a guy who'd worked in the secret side of things for a very long time, and he knew damn well how serious the government took the Official Secrets Act.
And he signed the Official Secrets Act. And even if they resigned these positions, this Official Secrets Act still applies to him.
Oh yeah, no, they once you sign the Official Secrets Act, that's it. That's you're done, basically.
I've signed the Official Secrets Act.
Have you?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So this stuff you can't tell us about?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not going to ask what, because that's just...
Well, I can't tell you.
Yeah, but you signed the Official Secrets Act, so don't do that live on air.
That's what I'm saying. I can't tell you.
Now, one of the threads that James Corbett kind of pulls apart in his most recent David Kelly video, relates to the anthrax attacks. Now, David Kelly would have known about any anthrax research because of being chief microbiologist at Porton Down. And don't forget that we had the anthrax attacks in the US in 2001. And far from being an isolated incident, they are a harbinger of the biosecurity state that we now have, that has essentially been building up for the last nearly 20 years, and is now in its apex in terms of what we've been seeing for the last 3 years. And I can't help but thinking now, in retrospect, that maybe there's some sort of connection, because, as I said before, there's a whole load of microbiologists that died suddenly, mysteriously, suicides, etc. Around that period. I mean, there's a alternative news website called rents.com that has been around, crikey, since the late 90s. And on that, you can search for, there's a list of dead microbiologists and other scientists around that period. And we can't go through all of them, obviously, but there's one that's very, very interesting. And he's called Vladimir Pasechnik. Now, he was a Soviet microbiologist, and he played a key role in the Soviet bioweapons program. He helped develop biological weapons for the Soviet military. including weapons using anthrax, tularemia, which I never heard about, and plague. The program aimed to develop strains resistant to antibiotics and vaccines. And in 1989, Pasechnik defected to the UK while attending a biotechnology conference. He revealed details about the extensive Soviet bioweapons program to British intelligence. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because guess who debriefed Vladimir Pasechnik?
Dr. David Kelly.
Precisely. And he would just skip past that one. He had warned that the Soviets had developed genetically enhanced biological agents that could spread diseases like plague. His revelations led to increased efforts by the West to limit bioweapons proliferation globally. Now, after defecting, Pasechnik worked at the UK's Nuffield Institute and advised the British government. But he also worked to Porton Down, because David Kelly suggested to him that they set up a company for him based in Porton Down doing this sort of research. Now that the more important point about that little snippet is less about Vladimir Pasechnik, but it gives you some kind of idea of how much power David Kelly had, because he was able to somehow get a Soviet defector who these are people that would have been treated with a certain level of suspicion for quite a while after they defected, just to make sure that they weren't double agents or whatever. But this guy is basically given a company in Porton Down and said that, dude, just go back to work. He's a bit of a
get on with it.
He's got Werner von Braun kind of thing going on. And he died in 2001 working in the UK. Now, what's also interesting is that he died around about the same time as the anthrax attacks in the United States after 9/11. And the cause of his death was initially unexplained, leading to speculation that he may have been killed by Russian agents. However, an inquest later concluded that he died of a stroke. Died suddenly. There's so much. I mean, there isn't even enough time in a normal hour to kind of cover this. If people are interested, as I said, James Corbett is the person that I found out about Vladimir Pasechnik from.
Mm-hmm.
And he's got a whole load of other material on his site that'll keep people busy for hours. So that's a few pictures of some of the other dead scientists. Some of the people that have been...
Why were they all killed?
Well, this is the fascinating question. This is one of the things I was bringing to the podcast, because I have no idea. They're all...
Yeah, I remember this happening. And I think, thinking, like there was another dead scientist every week. And I remember thinking, what the hell is going on?
Yeah. And it's the thing that this is why David Kelly's case is really interesting, because it's all completely the ferocity with which it's connected to the Iraq War and to his weapons inspections and to Saddam Hussein has always made me feel like that there was more going on there.
Yeah.
And when you look at just the list of different people connected to microbiology, and they're not minions. These are David Kelly type people in multiple countries: the US, the UK, Australia, Canada, Asia. It's crazy. But then when you think about what's happened since, particularly the last 3 years, you kind of wonder if, because assuming some of our theories about the last 3 years have any validity, it would suggest some sort of plan. Now, if this is not something that happens overnight, you don't decide this in 6 months. This is something that, I mean, it's the most dastardly plot in the history of the known universe, and it would take time. So the instigation of such a plot, assume if I take on the persona of a Dr. Evil type character and I'm going to institute some serious nastiness, one would seek to weed out people who might have a bit more honesty and integrity than one might otherwise want. And people who would be, I suppose, like Mikey Eden, for example. People who would not be quiet. And I'm trying very careful not to get the panel into any trouble. Let's move on.
I'm looking at the amount of scientists there, right? And thinking, that's a lot of people.
And that's only a small selection.
Yeah.
That's literally not even all of them.
And it's not as if they all died of old age either, you know. They all died under strange circumstances.
Absolutely. There's suicides there, there's car crashes, the usual.
I mean, coincidence, but strange that it should focus on a particular group of a particular set of scientists that are dealing with a particular subject.
Yep.
That
not a conspiracy theory, it's a coincidency theory.
But that screams that there's too many coincidences there. You know? But hey, who am I to question it? That's your job.
Well, this is what the rabbit holes are for, and asking these questions. I mean, to be honest, I used to just think it was an interesting intellectual exercise. It's become a bit more real and a bit more immediate in the intervening years, but it's still an interesting intellectual exercise.
Indeed.
And I mean, in terms of just going back to David Kelly and Iraq, the whole thing turned his final days into this complex symbol layered with loads of different meanings. There's all sorts of different aspects of that. And to critics of the war, Kelly personified the grave human consequences that came from politicians manipulating intelligence for deceitful ends. His unsolved death encapsulated the dishonesty and moral abdication underlying the entire disastrous Iraq affair. Iraq war dissenters and anti-establishment voices saw Kelly as a martyr figure silenced for challenging the system, and demands grew for a full inquest, arguing that if such a prominent official figure could be killed with impunity, it highlighted rot at the core of British democracy. Yeah. Now, conversely, for supporters of the government, because we have to try and be a little bit balanced, tiny bit, doubts over the official suicide narrative were destabilizing extremism. Blair derided calls for further investigation as disrespectful conspiracy theories. Sounds familiar. Allies urging respecting the Kelly family's desire for privacy and avoiding speculative dramas. Now, this is something that I've always found a little bit interesting, is David Kelly's wife and her silence about the whole thing.
She's got a bit of a look about her, hasn't she?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not kind of casting aspersions. It could be that the whole thing freaked her out so much, a bit like Jackie Kennedy, for example, who
she
also. She ended up marrying the richest guy in the world and living on a highly protected Greek island, which is what you do.
But this woman looks like she's got a bit of steel in her metal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
She doesn't look like one that would be easily cowed.
No, but she also looks like there's some intelligence in those eyes as well. And one would think that if you'd seen your loved one end up the way that David Kelly ended up, and then you see that despite all the blatantly obvious questions, the whole system is closing ranks. The police, the doctors, the government, the lawyers, the inquiry, everybody. And you didn't want to end up going the way of your husband. I suspect that you might probably keep your mouth shut.
Was she in on it?
Which she has. I've never really heard much of a peep out of her.
Yeah.
And there's a few other pictures. There's Mai Penderson, who was U.S. Army Air Force officer, who was very close friend of Kelly's.
Yep.
And one of the alternative explanations to why, one of the things that was being floated around the media at the time was that he was having an affair with her, and that somehow this was going to come out, or he felt really bad about it, or he was consumed by guilt or shame or something. And it wasn't, I don't know if it was, I'm not going to slander anyone by saying Piers Morgan said it, but it's the kind of thing that the Piers Morgan-esque characters in the media were talking about. The ones who,
the gutter press.
Gutter press is a good description for them. Although Piers Morgan makes some of them. Yeah, let's not go there. I hate that guy almost as much as I hate Tony Blair.
Oh, I can't stand.
Now, one of the little side notes in this whole case that I've always found fascinating is his dental records when missing. I can't remember off the top of my head how long it was. It wasn't that long, and then they just showed up again. Now,
had they been fixed?
Well, who knows? I mean, there's been some fantastic. I have to give some credit to people, because Norman Baker did some fantastic research on this, and also George Galloway, and also Tony Gosling, and they're all people. I mean, particularly George Galloway's film "Killing Kelly," which was on YouTube and was mysteriously taken down by YouTube a couple of days before, or maybe actually on the anniversary of his death. It disappeared into YouTube's black hole, never to be seen again. Fortunately, if you go to odyssey.com, ODYSEE.com, and do a search in their handy dandy search bar for Killing Kelly, you'll find it. And then you should just sign up to Odyssey and find a few cool channels and just bin YouTube. There's some things you've got to go to YouTube for because they're not really anywhere else, but
yeah,
I spend as little time on YouTube as possible.
Yeah, Odyssey's quite annoying though, because to put content up, you've got to use their kind of Bitcoin substitute thing in it. We just don't have any. We don't have the money to do that.
Interesting. Sorry, go on.
We don't have the money to do that, so Odyssey's not really a platform that we can use.
No, but Odyssey, BitChute, Rumble, to be honest, if you go onto any of the alternative platforms, whichever your favorite is, and you put Killing Kelly into the search bar, I would be very, very surprised if it didn't come up.
Oh, no, I'm sure it will. I think the problem with these alternative platforms, though, is that they're still very narrow, you know?
Yeah, they also don't have the money that Google chucked at YouTube, and they don't have the infrastructure, and they don't have the sheer quantity of designers and coders and people like me that you need. Me in my day job, that you need to actually build and maintain a video platform. And it presents some interesting challenges as well, not least amongst which there's the amount of storage that you need and the bandwidth.
I know. But you think about it.
Kelly cases. Sorry, go on.
You think about it. We put up about 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18. We're probably putting up about 24 gig a week onto YouTube.
Yeah. And that's
24 gig a week.
and that's just one.
That's just
one
one
channel.
tiny channel.
Yeah. And I mean, it as someone whose bread and butter is building web pages and dealing with database and content management systems and content delivery networks and all this kind of thing, I'm in awe of things like Netflix and YouTube. And I mean, the technical teams, those guys, they just do. I understand the tech, and I barely understand how things like YouTube and Netflix work. But the interesting thing about the Kelly affair is that it was one of the internet was just starting to really kick off in about 2003. Back in the late 90s, even 2001, when 9/11 happened,
yeah,
the internet was still very much in its infancy. But with the Kelly affair, things, I mean, bandwidth had started to improve, and there was just more content out there, and there was more. Most of the big newspapers had fledgling websites and things like that, and so it amplified all of the different theories. And I mean, I started covering this right from the beginning, and I mean, there's prisonplanet.com, which is Paul Joseph Watson, which doesn't, he took that down, but that was his past life was a massive conspiracy theory researcher working with Alex Jones, and he produced some fantastic material in that era as well.
Yeah.
But it was one of those cases that was exhaustively analyzed and critiqued by people like me, and people that did a lot more research than I did. That I was, because a lot of the blogging that I was doing was kind of what I do on Twitter now, just finding stuff that I found interesting and posting it and adding a little comment, which is the equivalent of a tweet now. But there was a lot of energy to the case as well. It was like there was a lot of energy in trying to stop the Iraq War as well. And the sort of the zeitgeist around David Kelly was that nobody believed the government. It was an early example of, I think, I wouldn't be surprised if there were people, maybe even some in the audience, that say that they woke up during the David Kelly affair.
And it was the BBC that burst it. Really?
Yeah. Yeah, they did.
It was the BBC were the people that were basically saying, there's something not right here.
Mm-hmm.
So how things
now,
have changed.
And one more, this is just going back to the reasons and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There is a chat for anyone who wants to follow David Kelly stuff. Dave on Twitter, you can see his username there.
Yeah.
Give him a follow, because he's produced some of the best David Kelly material on Twitter that I've seen. And for the whole month of July, he was doing a daily Kelly, basically. I mean, I do my daily Seagull, and he was doing a daily Kelly. And I've picked his first 10 reasons why David Kelly didn't murder himself. He's now up to 20, I think, because I think he's doing one every day for July. But obviously didn't want to lift all of his content. And I thought we could just go through these 10. They're on 2 slides.
Mm-hmm.
And then for people that want to go off and follow Dave and check out the rest of his content, because the other 10 reasons that he's got on top of these 10 are fascinating, and there's a few things in there that I didn't know about. So the first reason that Dave says why David Kelly didn't kill himself was because the knife had no fingerprints on it. Hey, but David Kelly wasn't wearing gloves when his body was discovered.
Yep. Okay. That sounds reasonable.
Yeah, that's got echoes of a passport that turned up in the rubble of 9/11. That's just like, yay, the building came down, but the passport's fine. Norman Baker, who I showed you a picture of a minute ago, and he investigated the case, and a contact told him, his friend took him outside, and as they stood in the cool air, told him Dr. Kelly's death had been a wet operation, a wet disposal.
Well, that's
They
spook
sought
speak.
Oh, it's very spooky.
No, that's spook speak for an assassination.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely. I asked my contact to explain what he meant, but the terms by the terms his friend has used, essentially it seems to refer to an assassination, perhaps carried out in a hurry.
Mm-hmm.
The third reason was a dog handler, Louise Holmes, found David Kelly's body slumped against a tree. That was I got that completely wrong earlier. Sorry about that.
Right.
After leaving him to report her find, paramedics arrived on the scene to find the body flat on the ground. Who moved his body and why?
Interesting.
The fourth reason, he allegedly overdosed on coproximol tablets. Yet Dr. Kelly suffered from unexplained dysphagia, a syndrome that makes it almost impossible to take pills. The drug in his body was 400% below the fatal threshold. There were no fingerprints on the pill packets found with him.
Okay.
Fifth reason, Dr. Kelly was apparently going to write a book, blowing the lid off the secrets that he knew. We've covered that one already, so we won't go over that one too much. Sixth reason, from Norman Baker MP, British diplomat David Browsher told the Hutton Inquiry that some months before Dr. Kelly's death, he'd asked him what would happen if Iraq were invaded. Dr. Kelly replied that he would probably be found dead in the woods, which we heard on that video.
Yeah, we did.
If people caught that. So the seventh was, did someone have advance warning of Dr. Kelly's death? Author Miles Gosler asks how Tony Blair got to know so quickly about Dr. Kelly's death when he was on a 14-hour flight from the US to Japan. In his 2010 memoirs, Blair claims that he was told it was a case of suspected suicide by an official on the plane. Blair immediately instructed the Lord Chancellor to set up a public inquiry. At 10 a.m. London time, this was done, and by 12 p.m., Lord Hutton was confirmed as his chairman. All this less than 3 hours after Dr. Kelly's body was found. The body was not identified or medically examined until the following day.
Why would you want to set up a public inquiry?
Well,
I mean, you've been told that
only the chief lizard would know that.
Yeah, you've been told this guy's been found dead. Would you not wait to get some kind of basic information before you goes, well, okay, we're going to be asked to set up a public inquiry, so in a couple of days' time, we would go, yeah, we're having a public inquiry. Because governments never move at this speed. Never.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And and Gosler established Blair's landing and takeoff times and asked why Blair could be so sure it was suicide within such a short timescale. Why was the traditional coroner inquest circumvented so swiftly?
Yeah.
And it's the thing that people have to understand is that there's a big difference between legally and medically between a coroner's inquest and one of these Hutton inquiry type things, particularly that a coroner can subpoena witnesses and he can take evidence under oath, and neither of those two things apply with a government inquiry, which only the government could. Yeah, they create a system to investigate the government and then just make it so the government's going to really be investigated. So the eighth reason, Dr. Bill McQuillan, a former consultant at Edinburgh's Royal Infirmary, who for 20 years has dealt with hundreds of wrist accidents. I have never seen one death of somebody from cutting an ulnar artery. I can't see how he would lose more than a pint of blood. Ninth reason, Dr. David Kelly left his house on the day at 15:20 p.m. and his family contacted the police at 20 to midnight, who arrived within 15 minutes. What the hell happened to him in the 9 hours between going for a walk and his body being discovered? That's a very good question.
Why did they leave it so long?
Well, exactly.
That's a big red rag there, isn't it?
There's so many of those. This was what I thought back in the day. It's one of the reasons that this case attracted and still attracts so much attention, because there's untold questions, unanswered, just things that happened that have never been explained.
Yeah,
completely blatantly obvious. And the government is doing a typical government thing where it just ignores anything it finds inconvenient. And calls everyone a conspiracy theorist. I mean, it's a fairly tired playbook now. So 10th reason, at 2:50 a.m., a police helicopter, thermal imaging equipment flew over the corpse where the body was found at 8:30 a.m. The pathologist checking the body said the latest Kelly could have died was 1:15 a.m. Therefore, at 2:50 a.m., that helicopter should have picked up the heat from the body.
Well, hold on.
So why not?
No, hold on. There's a couple of fallacies in there straight away, isn't there? Because
okay, well, you're a former policeman, so do tell.
When's the earliest he could have died?
I don't know.
Because, I mean, if he died at 6 o'clock, that would have a vastly different heat signature from one that had died at 1:15 a.m. You know,
that's true.
He's been out there since what? He left at 15:20. Say he was dead at 6, right? So then he's been dead for 7 hours, cooling off in July, right? So he's probably pretty close to ground temperature by the time, you know, he's maybe down at 20 degrees, you know. So I think that one's not a good reason, in my view. That's purely my view.
Absolutely. I mean, we're all entitled to an opinion, but I'd strongly recommend you check out Dave's other reasons for killing himself, because there's some really interesting stuff there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the cloud of uncertainty surrounding the final days and death of Dr. Kelly endures over, this is now nearly 15 years. 20 years.
20 years? That's his 20-year anniversary.
20 years. Officially deemed a suicide. Many still suspect the weapons expert was silenced by hidden actors to conceal uncomfortable truths that could fatally undermine the Iraq invasion. Discrepancies in the medical evidence, the unusually secretive inquest, and the British state's defensiveness bred persistent doubts and theories. Kelly's mysterious demise became both a warning and a call to conscience about establishment deceptions in matters of war and peace. Until records are unsealed, the full truth will remain elusive, but chilling circumstances offer crucial lessons on the need for transparency and accountability in the wielding of power over life and death. And that's something, unfortunately, it's like when I look back now, 20 years later, on what happened to David Kelly, it's almost like it was some sort of practice run, just in terms of the government deception, in terms of the media, in terms of all of it. It's like they were almost testing the water, or laying they were making their plans against us.
Well, it's like event 201.
Sorry, say that again?
Event 201, remember?
Well, exactly. And I mean, there was the famous drill on the day of 7/7 with that guy, Peter Powers. You can find the video on YouTube. Where it's like, oh, yeah, we were doing an anti-terrorist exercise on the day it happened, and it was the exact same station.
And and there was a full military exercise ongoing when 9/11 happened.
And there were FEMA drills at 9/11 that concluded in New York on the day before 9/11 as well. It's one of the telltales. As soon as one of the things for me with COVID, there was a few things right at the beginning which switched me, and that event 201 was absolutely one of them. And that's essentially the end of the presentation. I would just like to say
there's one thing I'd like to add, right, that I find a little bit strange. Okay. So in 2017, Dr. David Kelly's body was exhumed.
I didn't know that.
At the request of his family, right? And he was cremated at that point.
That's weird.
Yeah. Because they said too many people were treating his gravesite as like a shrine and demanding further inquiries. Now, you take the body, which has allegedly been poisoned, right, and you cremate it, and you're definitely not going to find anything anymore, are you?
No, and I mean the attitude of the family is always it's reminiscent of a conversation I had over lunch, a family lunch with a relative of an ex, and it was a birthday. I'm not going to go into details, but it was this person turned out to be involved in 7/7, and I'd been researching the London terror attacks quite a lot, and I started talking to them, and they just it's that normie mask comes up. I'm sure everybody listening has tried to talk to someone about rabbit hole stuff.
Yeah.
And you didn't realize that they were a normie, and you just see the normie mask come down, and they just become an NPC, and they don't want to engage. They don't want to know.
They go one way or the other, don't they? They either completely disengage or they become super aggressive.
No, it's crazy. But as a result of this, Iraq was invaded. And it's not because of what happened with David Kelly, but Iraq was invaded on the basis of a lie. And some people have never been put in prison, so I decided to put them in prison myself.
Yeah, because millions.
I think they look really good.
People died.
It's criminal. Literally, these two should be in The Hague, and they're not. So I thought a fitting end to the presentation.
I tell you what, though,
put them in prison.
That's a nice room. They've even got a computer and everything.
Mate, those icy, they call it the Den Haag Hilton for a reason, because it is, and this is not me just picking a room. I actually went looking for a prison cell room that I could put Tony Blair sitting down on, and then people said, "Oh, he needs some company." So
hold on,
I've got a version that I put up on Twitter that's got George Bush in there.
Did you put the picture on the wall?
No, that was just a little bit of messing around in Photoshop.
Was that you that put that there?
It was just a blank pinboard. So I thought, put up something
because I was going to say,
remind them of what they've done.
It's someone covering their eye.
And I mean, in summary, I think David Kelly is a fascinating character. I mean, he's one of those people who you have to wonder what secrets that guy took to his grave. And the what of how he died, it's like all of the conspiracy research that we've done that involves an assassination, like the Kennedy assassination, and to me the assassination of Pope John Paul I. There's this unfulfilled potential with all of them, and secrets that they take to their graves with them, and it just makes you wonder. I find it fascinating because these are questions that we're never going to learn the answers to, and I just that's why I do the research that I do, and that was the David Kelly presentation. So we can take some questions from the audience. You're more than welcome, John.
If there's anyone in the
This
audience,
is a really interesting one for me.
If there's anyone got any
if people
questions,
have got comments,
file them in.
Anything I got wrong? Any questions?
Yep. While I'm waiting to see if there's any questions appear, you can always support us at ko-fi.com/chasing descent. Anything that you submit is gratefully appreciated and allows us to keep producing these videos. Right, so what we got?
And if people feel like buying me a coffee, it's buymeacoffee.com/Techie. It's actually not for coffee, it's for seagull food.
You sad man.
And I just put some memes in at the end, just some of the stuff that it's my thing at the moment is turning Rishi the fake smiling Sunak into Roland Rat.
I tell you, it's hard to tell the difference, to be fair. that guy's not right. He's just not right.
I have to give credit to Bob Moran for Joe Biden's head. Bob has I've vandalized a few of his things, and I've stolen quite a few of his heads, and I've never had a letter from his lawyer. So Bob, if you're listening, I love you, man.
Spencer says, is it possible that it was all staged and he might be alive given the movement of the body and the dental records going missing? I don't think why would they want to keep him alive? Because he was a He was a bit of a rebel, wasn't he? Really, he was too principled. I think that was a problem.
Yeah, I also one of the conclusions that I've come to is that because it was very hasty. I think it was a very hastily organized thing, and so I suspect that possibly one of the ideas that some boffin in MI5 had was that if they set out a whole load of false leads and they redact a whole bunch of random stuff and they classify some random stuff for 70 years and they pump out different bits of false and or misleading information deliberately to have people like us chasing down dead-ended rabbit holes.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's pure speculation on my part, but with the benefit of hindsight, one has to wonder about these people that govern us. And I mean, I'm pretty sure everyone listening to this is probably asking that question already. But one of the reasons I do, this is another Vilnius one I was quite pleased with. Well, Ursula's a bitch, so I turned her into one. Pardon my language.
But that's what's his name's head. That's that mad doctor, the one that had 15 minutes of airtime and has disappeared again. Remember? Yeah, he's completely disappeared.
Yeah, it's the narrative is changing. I think they're losing track of their own narratives, and they're all so deep. I mean, the whole because if you think of the contrast, between him in Vilnius and him pretty much every time before Vilnius since the whole thing kicked off.
Yeah.
And he was being welcomed and everyone's like, oh, you're the God King Emperor of Europe. We all love Ukraine, Slavo Ukrainian. And now he's just...
It's just, what's the Johnny doing standing there? Why has he left his broom behind?
Yeah. And his missus is kind of deep in conversations like, they like her. Nobody likes you. And just for the record, I put Rishi in.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah. I think you made him a bit big,
that was kind of fun.
Yeah. Right. What's the next one then? What are we doing next?
I don't know.
Okay. Any suggestions from the chat?
I mean, if people have suggestions, I'll take a suggestion. I'm quite interested in doing the 7/7 bombings because it's kind of on a theme with 9/11, and there's some interesting stuff around that. You could pick one if you want to.
I don't mind. I mean, I've got the big list. I've got the huge list. Do you want me to start reading through?
Well, what's next on the big list?
Well, the big list has got loads of stuff on it. So let's start. We've got Tunguska, right? We've got Roanoke. The first colony. We've got the Overton Bridge in Scotland, where all the dogs commit suicide.
Okay.
We've got Skinwalker Ranch. We've got Black-Eyed Kids.
The Black-Eyed Kids one, I know it. I know it quite well.
Do you?
But that one may be just a little bit too dark for YouTube.
No, I don't think it is. I think YouTube's okay with dark stuff. But anyway, Walter Collins, The True Story of the Changeling.
I've never even heard of him.
The Sodder Children.
Why don't we do that, Walter Collins, The Changeling?
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Because that'll be a bit of a challenge for me because, like I said, this is literally the first time I've ever heard his name.
Right. Okay. Well, there you go. And I mean, we've got loads of others, but every time I think of something...
Well, I mean, the thing is, what we might have to do is combine some of them.
Yeah. Well, things like the Overton Bridge, you could probably cover that you probably cover Overton Bridge and maybe even Roanoke and Tunguska in, like one episode with 3 parts because they're not huge,
Yeah.
It just depends. It just depends on what you find, doesn't it? When you start.
Yeah, maybe we should go through the list. If you could paste it as a new document into our Google Drive.
Yeah, I'll do that.
And then because we can edit it collaboratively, and we can try and group things together a bit and see if we can. Because I think that would be fun. We've done a lot of political stuff.
See, this is good. This is good because Shalini's going, who? See?
Well, yeah, absolutely.
That's better. It's good that you find out about things that you didn't even know about, isn't it?
And Shalini, for the record, there's a movie called The Changeling, which I haven't seen, but I'm gonna watch it. But this is why the rabbit holes are fun for me as well, because it's you don't want to keep going over the same stuff over and over again, and being put having the challenge of creating an hour-long presentation in a couple of weeks is also fun as well, because I do have a day job as well.
Yeah, although you seem to spend most of it doing memes.
To be honest, I'm generally on Twitter when I'm waiting for the computer to do something, or I'm trying to solve a really complex problem. And sometimes the best way of solving a problem is to take your mind away from it. And I have to do my daily seagull and my daily Vlad. So I've generally got Twitter open in a browser tab. And
right, I'll send you a starter.
Pop in there.
I'll send you a starter on the Walter Collins thing, just an overview, and you can then you can dive in more. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
See what you think.
Cool.
You might want to. I don't know if we want to tie it in with the Sodder children as well, because that might be quite interesting. But anyway, they're a bit like. I think they're a bit like the Midwich cuckoos, you know.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. Right. Okay. So
cool.
I think that the Walter Collins isn't scary. No. Well, it could be. It depends. It depends how you think about it. It might be scary, but yeah. So thank you everyone for attending this another episode of Down the Rabbit Hole with me, John, and with Ed the Techie. So big round of applause. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you everyone listening, and it's been fun. We'll do it again in a couple of weeks.
We'll be back in 2 weeks with at least Walter Collins, the true story of the Changeling.
Cause I don't give a fuck what you say. Yeah, I'ma do shit my way. So you can go kick rocks, I'ma stack bricks up, build what I want to make. Yo, I got a lot of shit to say, so I'ma do this every day. I'll be writing things until I'm fucking buried in my grave. 6 feet deep under, but my body won't decay. Cause my messages are timeless, so they'll put them on display. Oh yeah, I rap with a certainty, I have a sense of urgency. A message for eternity, for everyone internally. I had some people burning me, but now they fucking learn to see I ain't the one to fuck with, now they looking nervously. And I don't really care what you think of me respectfully. You can kick rocks if you think you're fucking better, see. I will outwork you, turn you to an enemy. Hurt you so bad that you're gonna need some therapy. I got the motherfucking recipe. I've been cooking up hits, I'ma leave a legacy. You'll be looking small when you're standing right next to me. I'm 5'10", bitch, but I'm 10 feet. Cause I don't give a fuck what you say. Yeah, I'ma do shit my way. So you can go kick rocks, I'ma stack bricks up, build what I want to make. Cause I don't give a fuck what you say. Yeah, I'ma do shit my way. So you can go kick rocks, I'ma stack bricks up, build what I want to make. Yeah, I'ma do it my way. I can't contain it, I'm coming out with a statement. You really changed, man, all your music and arrangement. You don't know shit, shut your mouth, you can save it. I'm the same dude that got his come up from the basement. 100 songs, 100 weeks, didn't change it. Experiments, development, intelligence, and patience. I'll do it all again, cause I never feel complacent. Let's keep the good vibes, positivity's contagious. I'm never looking back, cause I made a life that's passionate. A college graduate suppressing all his talents, yeah. He found a way to go and change, become an advocate. For taking control of your life, go out and battle. And you think you have a dream, then act on it. Get after it, get out your head and fucking capture it. You got one life to master it. Don't give up on your future, we all start losers. We're all late bloomers, gotta struggle through the sewer. What you say, yeah, I'ma do shit my way. So you can go kick rocks, I'ma stack bricks up, build what I want to make. Cause I don't give a fuck what you say. Yeah, I'ma do shit my way. So you can go kick rocks, I'ma stack bricks up, build what I want to make. Yeah, I'ma do it my way.